Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Darwinian Delusions. And today with me is Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik. How are you doing, Shoaib?
Alhamdulillah, Sabur, you okay?
I'm good. I'm well. We haven't had a session for a long time. However, in between that, you've been very busy with some legends in academia. So can you keep us up to date with what you've been up to?
So since I think we last spoke, I started a series called Academic Access, and we've been running for now 2 months. And Alhamdulillah, even beyond my surprise, it's picked up a lot of traction with the wider audience and also academics. So we have had some big names come up, Michael Ruse being the most recent one, and we are going to have some big people coming up soon as well. And this is both in the academic culture, but also in the wider popular culture as well. So I can't really give off names, but I will probably say this to kind of give a teaser for next week. So next week we have two big guys who are going to be talking about Ibn Taymiyyah. And we have Dr. John Hoover from the University of Nottingham, who's one of the leading experts on Ibn Taymiyyah. And we have Dr. Carl Sharif, who wrote that book on reason and revelation in Ibn Taymiyyah's thoughts. So that's what's happening next week, inshallah. So there are many more people coming up, and hopefully it'll pick up and gain some traction. But yeah, alhamdulillah, I thank God for the success of the show.
Yeah. And one of the things about the project Academic Access is what really surprised me is how quickly it just took off. Definitely in the circles that we're involved in, the intelligent design, Darwinism, atheism sort of stuff. This is like something that came out of nowhere and just completely. It's like a video I saw a few years ago it was animated but it looked real, of a jet engine. A jet which actually went underwater and came back up. It's a lie. It never took place, but that's what Academic Access feels like. Something a bit surreal came out of nowhere. One of the things which I think really surprising for me was you managed to get three very big names speaking about evolution who are actually hold totally different views, which you don't even. I mean, you don't criticize other Muslims, alhamdulillah, it's not something that you do, but you definitely brought on people that were people that you, from a purely logical point of view, you couldn't have agreed with all of them, right? So you have somebody who strongly was saying there is no, we won't accept Darwinism. You have somebody who's accepting it hook, line, and sinker, and someone else who had a very interesting approach. So could you just give a few thoughts about that?
Yeah, so we had 2 rounds of Islam and evolution. The first round was, it involved a very multidisciplinary perspective. So a sociological analysis done by Glenn Moran, a historical analysis by Sarah Qudway, she's a PhD student at Toronto. And then we had Nazir from Yaqeen Institute, Nazir Khan. He co-wrote that paper with Yasir Qadi. So he came in with a theological angle. Now, and that was the first round. The second round, I think, was nearly 2 weeks ago. We had now 3 people who were trying to explain how they understand the compatibility between Islam and evolution. We had Dr. Shahadi al-Masri, who completely denied evolution on all accounts, but during the discourse, he was able to concede some points that I brought to him, which was interesting. That's very interesting. It shows that he's very willing to listen and stuff. Then we had Dr. Rana Dajani, who's on the complete opposite side. She completely believes in the harmony of Islam and evolution. And then we had somebody who I have a lot of respect for. I mean, I've gotten to know him a lot over the past few months. His name is Dr. David Solomon Jalajo. Really good friend. I consider him a really good friend and a very sincere brother. And he talked about how within the Quran, there is space for the idea in believing that humans could have existed prior to Adam, because the Quran isn't clear on that. But Adam in himself is a miracle creation. So we had a variety of different perspectives. And what I wanted to do was through that week was to give people a direct interface with these individuals so that they can make up their own minds, bring up and their line of reasoning is crystal clear. So any ambiguity, I try to remove it so that people who watch it can say, okay, that's where this person is coming from, that's where that person is coming from. I can now make my opinion. That was the point of that. And very interestingly, bro, this coming week in July, I'm not going to mention the names yet, but we actually have another week on evolution, but on the philosophy and science of evolution. So we have one guy, he's very big. Like I said, I want to keep it a surprise. He's going to be discussing about the challenges of neo-Darwinism, scientifically speaking. So that's going to be a very interesting one because people, this is a very central discussion, even in your own channel, Darwinian Delusions, right? And then we have another guy who's going to be talking about the way we understand evolution, which is a historical science, versus physics and chemistry, which we can analyze today, right? How do we understand the differences between these two? Like epistemically speaking, do they have the same weight? So he'll be talking about that. And I think that channel will be so good. I think that discussion will be really, really good. So people, what I'm trying to do is, like I said, make these ivory tower academic discussions really accessible, so that inshallah, maybe the people who are watching it, they can go on and read these books and papers for themselves. That was the fundamental motivation of this anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say this, that a few years ago, when I hadn't studied biological
so we have to take a piss at Jimmy Turner, man. Look at his comment right there. The talk with Jimmy Turner was out of this world. No way, Jose. No.
Who is this guy? This guy's amazing. MashaAllah. Actually, Jamie, mashallah, he is someone who is up and coming for everybody to make sure you follow his channel. I've asked him to make a channel. I don't think he's made one yet, but definitely some of the stuff about epistemology, you guys really need to get into tune with that, because for far too long, and this has been my belief, for far too long, du'at have relied upon the works of Plantinga and others, and simply regurgitated that, when we simply need our own epistemology, right? And we need it clarified. So that's great. One last thing I just wanted to say, what I really like about your approach is that you're willing to bring on people who are sometimes very controversial, and you're willing to talk to people who've never talked to each other before. That's why I found really interesting about the work that you do, because you're not willing, you're willing to basically take the discussion away from the 2 silos or 3 silos and bring them together and be like, what's happening, guys? And alhamdulillah, so far what's very interesting is, there wasn't any fireworks. It was just very academic, very nuanced, and everyone's trying to explain their position. And I would also say that if a few years ago a discussion like this took place, it would be much more likely that people are going to be staying away from the likes of Harun Yahya, right? And that type of stuff. Because I think we can all agree that if you just go down the approach of saying, forget it, Darwinism is not even accepted by the scientists, right? It's just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. It's not true. As Muslims, we're married to truth before we're married to any personality, or married to anything else. So I'm definitely where I stand when it comes to Darwinism, hence the channel's name. But still, let's have a discussion, let's have it out, and let's take it forward. So today's topic is about scientism's impact on theology, right? Now, when you first mentioned this to me, it was like, wow, right, this is something that we've been facing for years, and we've never actually discussed openly as Muslims. And it's been sort of discussed in WhatsApp groups in which you have ulama and other people, but you're bringing this discussion forward on a live platform. So what's the reasons for that? Why did you want to discuss this?
I feel that mashallah, even you yourself, you've talked about scientism, how it's very different to science. Muslims have generally had no problem with science because it's just a method and allows us to understand the natural world. And of course, it has its limitations. But scientism is now an entire worldview that we're bringing forward, or rather, critics of religion are bringing forward, or even theists themselves are absorbing, without understanding the full implications of this. And the idea here is that if we believe in scientism, which is the simple thesis that everything can be explained through the prism of science, this is fundamentally a flawed methodology, a flawed way of looking at things. And the reason why that is because scientism prescribes certain limits which we believe does not befit God, right? So, and I think that is a very important starting point. So theologically, our ground is much wider than what science can prescribe for us. And I think that's why we need to kind of really see how scientism is evolving and morphing into different territories. And this is what I'm trying to do, is looking at the effects that scientism has brought out, not just in culture. People have talked about the impact of scientism in culture, how our first reference is always, is it scientific, right? That's a way of appropriating scientism. But I think the most important thing is, how has scientism impacted theological outlook? And this is something that, as we get through it, inshallah, we have this started off particularly in the early 20th century, late 19th century, when that whole conflict paradigm started, coming out to the public. And since then, I think that theologians, be it in the Muslim circles or Christian circles, they have to some extent paid lip service to scientism. Yeah. And how they have done that is, I think, of great importance, because we need to make sure we cannot dilute our theology to such an extent where it's so amenable to scientific progress that we're fashion theists. That's what I call it. So whatever the latest science is, that's where our theology should be premised on. And that's what I'm trying to question.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting way of looking at things. And what's powerful is that what you've said here, you're coming from a background where you changed from being a scientist to now you're going down the theology route. And of course, there's a lot of gray areas in terms of even the theology route, because of course Imam Ghazali and quantum mechanics and all the stuff you want to work on. However, usually what you've just said now is the sort of thing you would expect somebody without a science background to say. Maybe somebody who's come from a pure Islamic background, pure classical reading of the texts and whatnot, and a madrasa graduate or whatnot. And you would usually find, they would say this, you usually find a Muslim scientist like yourself who changed over to theology saying the opposite and saying, you guys aren't being amenable enough, right? So you're kind of like a black duck here. So what's going on?
So initially, I think many people will be surprised with this. I had no theological training or background. I mean, I'm 32 right now, and I only knew what Bismillah, Inshallah, Mashallah meant. Just those very basic things. I didn't even know what they meant until I was 21. That's how late I came to the scene, right? And that only started happening. I only started looking into Islam because of my PhD. In my PhD, I had, you could say, some kind of crisis, but also a reality check that I didn't want to do engineering for the rest of my life. I come from a chemistry and chemical engineering background. And I thought, what is this? So, and alhamdulillah, through the Islamic Society at Nottingham University, which is where I graduated from, I really was able to understand what I was missing. And I felt that there was a huge shift in my worldview. Now, in the beginning, I was a sort of person, when you say miracles, I'm like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make scientific sense. Or I wouldn't believe in the concept of a soul, right? The very, very, very limited way of looking at things, a very scientific oriented person. But through going through philosophy and theology, I realized that how limited a scientific perspective, not to undermine science, I have to be clear here. No one undermines science in any shape or form. I rely on science to, even this technology that we're having, through which we can discuss, is based on science, right? Yeah. Medicine, which helps me, my parents, my wife, my son, is based on science. But I understand the limitations of science. And then as I, got more familiar with Islamic theology and philosophy, going through that, track, I really, alhamdulillah, understood where everything kind of fits into place. And once that was clear to me, that's when I started researching and writing papers. And then since then, alhamdulillah, it's been a positive journey, alhamdulillah.
Absolutely. And also, like, your journey was kind of like where you just went full gung-ho, right? You just went, right, let me go into academia, let me study this. I mean, if I'm not wrong, there was a conference that you and Hamza attended some years ago, and Hamza, I think, said to me something to the words of, basically what I remember is that at that point, when you guys attended that conference, you'd read every single book on atheism in Islam and atheism in general by that point, by an ex-Muslim, by an atheist, by whoever. You just literally went through every single thing with a fine comb.
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah. So then you decided, okay, so now I have this diagnosis, now here's the solution, and then now you're actually working towards that. So let's get straight into the topic. What is, if we were to summarize it for everybody before we get into the deep waters, what is the issue with scientism's impact on theology? Wouldn't that be a sort of good thing where theology just starts accepting some of the things that science has been proposing?
Right. Okay. So I think let's come back to definitions, because I think that's very important. Scientism, as I mentioned, is not science. Science is a method, and I've always said this, it's a methodology, and just allows you to understand how nature operates. That's it. It's based on certain presumptions, based on certain tools, and we keep evolving and adapting our technology to get better information of how the world works. Scientism, however, is a worldview. It prescribes everything to be understandable by the prism of science. And I think that's where we need to be very clear on. Muslims are science friendly, but they are completely against scientism. That has always been the case. There's never been a problem with that. The terminology may not have existed, maybe in past 400 years, but that understanding was there. I think it was there. Now, given that, we now need to explain what theology is, because I think that's also a bit of a loose cannon if you don't define it properly. Theology, in very simple terms, as I understand it, is simply your prescribed worldview, which has been given to you by a religion, which makes you a follower of that religion, right? So if, for example, if somebody comes up to me and he says he believes in two gods, that person is de facto not a Muslim. That is outside the square of Islam, right? Now, this is not to say that, oh, you're not being inclusive enough, because you hear that argument all the time, you've got to be inclusive and what have you. No one is denying, we can be socially inclusive and having friendly relationships. But the function of theology is to demarcate what you believe in. That is the function of theology. Right? So if you don't believe in the Prophet ﷺ, that's a huge question mark in whether you're a Muslim or not, right? If you don't believe in Allah, that's a huge question mark over your status as a Muslim. So the function of theology is to prescribe certain limits which you can and cannot believe. If you step outside of that, you are non-Muslim or non-Christian or whatever religion square you want to adopt. And if you're inside that box, then you are an advocate and a follower of that religion. That is what theology does. That is the function of theology. So now that we've understood those two, we now need to kind of address the connection between the two. How is scientism impacting a theological outlook? So in my personal opinion, I think there are several things that have happened. And my plan is to kind of write a short book, a very short book on this, so that people can kind of see this. There are some things, there are some ways in which scientism has impacted Christianity, which may or may not have parallels with Islam, and vice versa as well, right? The vice versa as well, right? So for instance, let me give you a starting point. When we had in the early 20th century logical positivism, that everything had to be observed or if it wasn't observable, it was a nonsensical statement, right? That was the point of that, right? So, and because of that, a lot of things like the question of God, the question of morality, metaphysical things were all like bubbly stuff. They didn't have any validity to them whatsoever, right? And now what has happened, I think as a response to that, is if you see some of the work that came out in the 20th century, it will surprise you. So what some theologians and thinkers started doing, and this is something that I'm adding a caveat, this is just preliminary analysis, I'm still looking more into this. What they started doing was they were saying, okay, hang on, let's look at some of the commonalities between scientific language and religious language. And if we can kind of find a denominator between the two, then we can kind of validate theology or religion because it has some kind of similarity with scientific language. So in science, as you guys know, right, science uses a lot of metaphors, it uses models to be able to convey certain things. To give a very simple example, when we talk about the sun, right, and the solar system, we usually use that to explain atoms to young children, right, where you have the nucleus in the middle and the electrons circling about. Now, of course, models and metaphors and etc., all of that are limited devices, but they do the job in being able to convey certain things. So we use what we know to explain what we don't know, right? Now, initially, it was always thought that science was objective, it had no subjectivity and whatsoever, and religious language was always metaphorical, it was all subjective, and didn't really have much value. But what ended up happening is because theologians, they started saying, well, look, science is using models and metaphors, and so is Christianity. Therefore, religious language is okay, right? So I feel that the underlying motivation behind some of these works, so I've read, works in 1916, 1903, 2020, all the way up to the modern time, right? But I'm still kind of going through this to kind of have a concrete thesis here. So this is, like I said, preliminary analysis. I felt that the underlying motivation of this was that, look here, guys, religious language is not a problem. It does not convey, it's not farcical. It's not ambiguous. Just because we have metaphor, it doesn't necessarily mean that religious language you should throw out a window. It has similarities with science. Therefore, it's validated. That was, I feel, the first stepping point, at least in Christian thought, which led to the understanding that religion can only be validated through the prism of science. So do you see how they came under so much pressure to be able to say that, look, religious language has value? Whereas what I feel we need to do is we need to be crystal clear that the methodology of something is of science is something else. The methodology of religious language is something else. But when we use the same criteria to judge both, then of course you're going to get apples and oranges. You're going to get two different things. So that was the first kind of observation that led me to believe, hang on, how is scientism even impacting our language? And this is what I was able to find. Like I said, predominantly stuff for now.
Yeah, very interesting that I started off with language, because I was listening to, oh my God, what's her name? Susan Hack, right?
Yeah.
So she talks about, I think it's called 6 Signs of Scientism. She's written a paper, or 11 Signs of Scientism. And one of them, and she's just, of course, an atheist philosopher, she's talking about scientism, not in the religion science debate, but scientism in the general domain of the public domain. And what are the signs? And one of the signs, she said, is to use the word science and apply it to something totally non-scientific to give it weight. So she talks about, management sciences, right? She says, how on earth is that science? And she gives all these other examples. So you can see it's not just something that religious folk do, but even non-religious folk, that, right, science has this massive street cred. It has this weight. Let me take it and let me label it to something else, and let me just call it Islamic sciences. Right? When we don't mean the same thing, right? So even when it comes to Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, and it speaks about, what's the name of the book that is translated as Revival of the Sciences? Yeah. So it's not the same thing. Yeah, but it's just, people are like, okay, there's all these religious books, right? But look, Revival of the Sciences. But no, it's not the same thing. But it's just because we're infected by scientism. You know, we just feel it has this additional weight.
Yeah. So that was something that occurred in mostly in the Euro-Christian centric world, right?
Yeah.
We Muslims, I don't think, have had that per se. We're beginning to have it now, which I'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
But now let me share something which happened in the Muslim world, which didn't necessarily happen in the Christian world.
Sure.
And this is the whole science of the Quran movement, right? That we Muslims felt that, okay, science is now a badge of honor, as you said, and anything that we can get that is close to being scientifically validated gives us immediate prestige, right? And I think that what happened was, because people were able to utilize the science of the day and corroborate it or align it with certain verses, automatically people are like, yeah, whoa, science is in the Quran. But you see, now what happened? As many people, this movement like literally exploded, right? Yeah, you have thousands of books, conferences over this, right? I mean, till now we have productions on Islam and science. Till now we have that today, right? And unfortunately, what has resulted, and I think Hamza, he even put this on his website, is that when people premise their entire Islamic worldview on this paradigm, what ends up happening is that the moment they realize that this is not a robust line of reasoning, they will lose faith. And that's what happened. That's what people have ended up going towards. That unfortunately, because of this tight connection that people have tried to draw between Quran and science, this has been fundamentally a categorical error. And I think that's a lesson that we should learn from. That's a serious lesson we should learn from. Because I think Christianity in the past tried to do that. They tried to plug in all the the biblical narrative on Aristotelian thought. And when they found out that Aristotelianism is a flawed scientific perspective, not a metaphysical perspective, because the moon having craters went against Aristotelian science. The fact that there were other celestial trajectories that were going against Aristotelian physics. So all of that was a huge burn for Christianity in history. And unfortunately, I think we've kind of slipped into that in the past 50, 60 years.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a slippery slope, definitely.
Yeah.
But this whole science in the Quran movement, and you said, people base their faith on it, and then they realize, okay, maybe it's not the best argument, and then it affects them. Yeah. Kind of reminds me, it's kind of similar to people whose very understanding of Islam or their attachment to Islam is based upon a popular scholar, a popular personality, and if they are refuted in a video, or if they're involved in something, right, which they don't really, which is un-Islamic, their faith gets shattered, because they've taken all of their, all of their trust, and they've said, right, I'm giving it to this person here. Same with the science thing. It kind of reminds me of my brother-in-law is a very spiritual guy, mashallah. He comes out with some really, really amazing spiritual gems. And he once said to me something very deep and philosophical. And the guy, he's like, mashallah, he's graduated from Oxford. He's studied quantum mechanics, and he's just a brain box. And in terms of philosophical arguments and all these types of things, I mean, he'll understand them like this. But he said something very interesting to me, right? He said, look, should I teach my children I'm paraphrasing here, should I just teach my children the rational evidence that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is a true messenger of Allah? If somebody comes along and confuses them, right, then would they leave Islam? No. Why? Because we teach them to love the Prophet ﷺ. Now, apart from the love, you can teach the rationality, you can teach these things, but it's not just the case that, okay, let's just give them some rational evidence that he's the messenger. Yeah. So you have to have this type of approach, which is, yes, you got rationality, but you also got spirituality. Then you also got your love of Allah, your love of the Prophet ﷺ, right? These things. So I think that's what the science in the Quran discourse has destroyed. It's destroyed the spiritual element of Islam. And when I see people speaking about this particular topic, I find that the people who use science in the Quran the most are usually people who don't know how to articulate the spiritual foundations of Islam, or they're actually ashamed of them. They think, oh yeah, it's subjective and blah, 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 blah. And then they just say, okay, no, this is the only thing. One popular guy, when I was trying to explain to him why science in the Quran doesn't, because obviously, I mean, his sort of reply was, but it works. The thing is, in Islam, just because something works, just because the vast majority of non-Muslims are likely to believe it when you give them science in the Quran, it doesn't mean we should actually use it. But again, it goes to show the power of scientism.
Exactly. And I think that's why I think that at every point you have to make a kind of a split decision between pragmatism versus academic routes. I think that always has to happen. But I do feel that because of scientism, it has even shaped our understanding that every single objection out there needs to have a rational response. Because remember, I remember saying is that we are not humans having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. We are spirits first. We are souls first, right? And of course, this comes with maturity. I mean, I would never be able to appreciate what I just said when I was 21. I would never be able to understand. I wouldn't comprehend. But I now understand that of course, we have our scientific impetus there. We have everything there, but and we have our objections. We have a robust defense there. But I'm saying is that the be all and end all? Not necessarily. And I was even actually speaking to one guy who's coming up in July as well. Like, this guy is in, like, you can say, the top levels of logic, like complex logic, right? He's mastered that, and he was telling me stuff like this. So he believes that there's so far we can go with rationality, but there's an aspect of Sufism or Tasawwuf, spirituality that you cannot reduce to propositions. You cannot reduce to science. You cannot reduce to rationality.
It's almost like killing the way that we view Islam traditionally, right? As an example, in the past, and you do find this in some places in Pakistan still, and in some places in Yemen and some parts of Muslim world, when you're talking about a miracle, and you are talking to Muslims about a miracle, and you're like, Allah created Isa alayhi salam without a man's involvement, and you find the Muslims in the audience be like, Allahu Akbar, like, Subhanallah, and you come to the Western world and they're like, how does that make sense? How is that possible? How does that fit? But this is Allah we're talking about, who set the laws of logic, the uniformity of nature and all the rest of the things in motion. For Allah to say kun fayakun and a normal reproduction takes place, or Allah says kun fayakun and a supernatural one takes place, such as that of Jesus, it's the same thing, right? But we're so affected, we're so infected by this type of scientism that even Muslims sometimes are kind of like, how do we give an answer to that? We don't give an answer except by saying Allah did it. That's the point. And this is the thing that I find, if we look at people that approach Islam from a spiritual perspective, and then they look for rational evidences or all those types of things, and then you have those people who are constantly they're just looking for some logical argument for everything. So you can logically show them it makes sense to believe in God, logically show them it makes sense to believe in Islam, but then they'll say the Prophet said that the sun will rise in the west. Like, how does that make sense? You see, so they'll still have these issues, and the fundamental problem, like you mentioned, it's spiritual immaturity. That's the fundamental problem, nothing else.
Yeah, I also feel that there's maybe a lack of training on some people's side, right? So remember, when you're looking at science and religion, I found out, because I speak to scientists and I speak to ulama constantly. I always bounce back between these two, and it's very important to do that, because the paradigms that they're in are sometimes so vastly different.
By the way, for anybody watching, nobody on earth does that, which is why I really love Shoaib Bhai, yeah? Nobody does that. Why does no one do that? Everyone's in silos.
Yeah, exactly. So, and to try and avoid that, what I try to understand is get where they're coming from. Now, the training of a theologian is vastly different to the training of a scientist, right? And unfortunately, what happens is, because of lack of familiarity of the training, of the methodologies involved, sometimes they'll just take their training and apply it on every other discipline, every discipline out there. And this leads me to my third kind of observation in how scientism impacts theology. So somebody was mentioning about why do we need to stick up for Darwinism or evolution in Islam. I'll get to that question after pointing what I'm about to say. So we have some individuals, for example, Dr. Rana, right? Now, Dr. Rana knows that I disagree with her position. We had a talk after this, and alhamdulillah, on very friendly terms. And I told her that the methodology here is not applicable, because you're overriding the science. So you're overriding the Quran and Hadith just because the science says so. But within Quran and Hadith, you have usul, you have principles involved, right? So you take things as they are apparently until there's linguistic reasons to do so, right? Because if you're saying, okay, this conflicts with science, therefore run it with metaphor, well, you could then say that God is non-existent because it conflicts with science. Then somebody goes, okay, maybe that's an exception. Then the question then comes, okay, so you allow an exception, but based on what criteria? It's an open box after that, right? Now, because I have a paper on this coming out soon, inshallah. And basically the idea here is that if you make Adam a metaphor, right? Now, Adam is mentioned in several other verses with other prophets, Noah, Isa, and what have you, right? Now, if you look at those verses, you cannot say, okay, this individual Adam is a metaphor and this other individual is not, because it's so arbitrary. In the same verse, you're saying this individual is metaphorical, but the other is not. So the problem here is that when you open that box, unless you have a constructive usuli methodology, it's just going to go everywhere. And then people will be able to interpret anything and everywhere, whatever they want, which completely defeats the purpose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to add to that, I mean, I'm really, when you first said that you're going to be getting Rana and stuff, the first thing was like, whoa, like some of the things that you said about methodology, but you obviously explained to her that some of the implications are this, which obviously she's going to be recognizing that, well, okay, this is serious. But also, if we actually take this approach, then I think the term you used is fashionable theism.
Yeah.
In the future, as an example, if it does turn out that the Big Bang model, whatever version of it they have right now, is no longer, is superseded by some other eternal universe idea, then we would just go back and say, okay, the universe having a beginning, that's not true. The universe always existed, and Allah always existed with the universe. Astaghfirullah, and it just carry on and on and on and on. And the powerful thing I think about your approach, which I like, is you're trying to give a metaphysics of Islam which is timeless, which would have been true 1,000 years ago, and it will be true in 1,000 years from now. And that's like, it's just a broad framework. It's what Hamza Sotsi says is we got to future-proof the dawah. Yeah, we got to do something, because if you look at the answers that Muslims gave about evolution about 100 years ago, right? They were enough to basically make their audience feel like it's not an issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you had the other Muslims who just went gung-ho and, the type of the Jani approach, right? Just everything's a metaphor, blah, 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 blah. And both of these things have shown to historically fail, right? The approach where you simply deny and you say, we've got nothing, it's not even a theory, it's nothing, right? Those people, they're going to get educated, they're going to go study, they're going to be like, what on earth were you guys talking about? Then you're going to have the other people who are going to be like, go gung-ho, there's no such thing as, Adam didn't exist, it's a metaphor, blah, 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 blah. And then people will go back and say, wait, hang on a second, but in the Quran it says this, it says that. Hang on, what about angels? And then some of them were saying the same thing about angels. Oh no, angels, no, that's not what they are. So you will lose trust. And as Muslims, I think what we need to do is, Islam is 1400 years old. We've faced the Mongols, we've faced the Crusaders, we've faced all of these people, right? And we've faced, we had the whole eternal Quran debate. We had the likes of Imam Ghazali defending Islam against the heretics. We've been through everything. This is another phase. Let's all at least be honest. Yeah, let's not have these fake approaches, because I get people. I had somebody saying to me, Sabur, look, in reality, what you're doing is overkill, because Harun Yahya type of stuff, it does work on the majority of Muslims. But that's not the right answer, because we need to just say, as it says in the Quran, that you stick to the truth even if it's against yourself. Yeah, we just need to be honest and clear, and as true to ourselves as we should be as Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I think, just to add to that point, somebody even asked me, then why do we need to reconcile evolution with Islam? My point is not necessarily to quote unquote reconcile. It's to show the maximum limits of science and the maximum limits of our theology, then to create that interface, right? Now, that's all that I'm trying to do. I'm saying that this is the furthest we can go from a theological box. This is the furthest we can go from a scientific box, and that's it. And now, are there some compromises we can make on both sides? Possibly, but are there some? No, there are obviously red lines from both sides, and that's it. It's the approach that I'm taking is an academic one, in the sense that in the book, the way I've written is that I'm not saying that evolution is true. Whether evolution is true or not, I say it's up to you to believe, right? I present the evidences, I present all the the criticisms. That's up to you to believe in that. But I'm saying, imagine if evolution is true, how far can we absorb it in our theology? That is the question that I'm entertaining. Hopefully, by the end of that, and I'm not saying that this is the only approach. I am very open to saying that there might be an Ibn Taymiyyah approach, because I'm focusing this book squarely from a Ghazali's perspective. If you take Ghazali's framework, how would he approach it, right? And then I clearly suggest that we need more works from Ibn Taymiyyah's approach towards evolution, Maturidi's approach, all these different theological models that we have in our tradition. How would they approach it? And that's when we kind of get this very robust framework which we can rely on. What I personally dislike always is I don't like that we just run the science over the Quran and Hadith, or we use Quran and just shut down the science. I think both are very, very simplistic binaries that we need to kind of avoid.
And absolutely, and I think sometimes it's false bravado. It's like, we believe in the Quran, and it doesn't matter if the scientists are saying that water is H2O, because the Quran just says water is water. When in reality, the Quran is not making the claim against H2O. A lot of the time, like some of the things I've heard, like if you look at the really ridiculous debates which are happening about the people who are trying to claim that the sun goes around the earth, right? And they're saying, no, it's the book of Allah. The book of Allah, we will take over any observation. So hang on a second, guys. I believe, as you do as a Muslim, that the Quran is telling us that there's a virgin birth, right? I don't care if all the scientists in the world laugh at that. I don't care if the whole world laughs at that. I will believe that, because that's what the Quran says. But what you're saying is not what the Quran is saying. The Quran doesn't say that the sun goes around the earth. You've just made that up. So let's have a debate and nice, calm academic debate and let's flesh it out. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole problem, and I think this is the perception that happens with the work that you're doing. A Darwinist would look at you and say, standard Islamist apologist, yeah? And then a someone with no scientific training, someone with no philosophical training, purely coming from an Islamic perspective, but not even fully understanding the Islamic perspective, look at you and say, yeah, that's a modernist. So you get both sides, when in reality, you are simply doing what I think is the job of Sunni orthodoxy, which is simply to say, here is our framework. Now this framework's immovable. Let's see how things fit. And if they don't fit, we'll reject them, right? So let's go back to this topic of scientism. With this topic of scientism impacting theology, do you feel that this is in large part not only due to the successes of science, because that's been around, but also due to this feeling that it is Islam not accepting scientism which leads us not to, say, win Nobel Prizes? Do you think there's that false argument being made?
Right. Okay. So before I answer that, I just want to get a major diss that Jamie Turner threw my way. So he says, I just saw the LFC photo in your background. Subhanallah, akhi, you're guided to support the right football team. So first and foremost, I'm in my brother's room and he supports LFC. If I were to choose a team, it'd be Manchester United. I'm MU all the way. So, so just to get that clarified. Number two, with regards to what you said, you do not need to adopt scientism to win Nobel Prizes, right? All you need to do is to be a good scientist to win a Nobel Prize, right? Yeah. We know that God has instilled laws in this universe, right? And that's by his will, that's by his permission, right? And our job as a scientist is to be able to understand, create an understanding of how these laws work. That's what a scientist is supposed to do. You adopting scientism or not is not going to affect your outlook. What we need to do is that we know that God is the absolute creator of everything. We know that he has laws in place. Now, it is your job to pick up the math books, to pick up the physics, chemistry, biology books, or engineering books, right? Get through the material and make your best attempt to understand the phenomena you're looking. That doesn't require you to adopt scientism, because if you think about it, we have some of the sharpest Muslims out there who are producing amazing research. I work at a university. I have seen my Muslim colleagues who are, mashallah, my chair, Dr. Yusuf Nadal, he's brilliant. Like, he's got like 250 publications, and he's an absolute gem. He prays his prayers. He's a leading example for somebody like me. Now, I'm not necessarily a chemical engineer in the best sense of the word, right? Because I kind of left it behind. But I feel that he is an absolute role model. He's got patents around the world. He's got 200 papers, and he's 50. How do you publish 200 papers, academic papers, and math papers, man? It's just crazy. Mashallah. So I feel that's what you need. You need to be a good scientist to win Nobel Prizes. You don't need to adopt scientism to get Nobel Prizes.
Absolutely. And the example I always give is of a friend from Manchester who's been on this channel before. His name's Dr. Farid Khan. So he's actually a research associate at Cambridge University. He did his PhD there. And he's actually worked with the Wellcome Trust, the Bill Gates Foundation. He's won awards, major journals and conferences around the world he goes. He, in fact, set up major conferences. I attended one of the conferences that he set up, which had scientists from around the world. And they were talking about, sometimes they were saying things which Islamically don't fit within the Islamic paradigm. So, for example, one of the conferences was not only to do with your standard stuff, but also AI and machine learning and other stuff. But in that, there were some things which were clearly, from an Islamic theological point of view, didn't make any sense. So one of them was about, is it possible to basically live forever by uploading our consciousness, right? Which from an Islamic metaphysical point of view doesn't make any sense. But he has enough maturity to understand, right, I get it. With this type of stuff, you will get these people with these opinions. But overall, I'm trying to achieve these major goals. No problem. I'll go full steam ahead and do it. Even to the point where malaria today, I believe it's called, it's a major science journal about malaria. He, using his PhD students and repositioning of existing drugs, he put out something which saved we've saved a lot of lives. I don't know the numbers exactly, but he put it online. And that led him to be deplatformed by some major pharmaceutical companies, because he used to work for GSK. And he's very open about this. And they deplatformed him because a lot of people lost a lot of money, millions, in fact. And he was told, don't put this information for free, because you're going to be repositioning drugs, so you don't need new drugs, which is going to, there's a lot of money. We're talking about millions, sorry, hundreds of millions here, right? And malaria is a huge thing, as you know. He was like, I'm doing this because my objective, and he's made this clear in even the video that he did that I've put on this channel. He said, my paradigm is whoever saves the life of one, saves the lives of all. It's not about money. It's not about anything else, right? So being a Muslim good scientist has nothing to do with scientism. That's the message you're trying to give.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I completely agree with that. And I think it's very noble of him, man. Like, I think many people would monetize that product and what have you. And I think you've also raised an interesting point, which is, I think, maybe the fourth dimension of how scientism has impacted our theology. Transhumanism is just trying to extend our lifelines more than anything, right? Yeah. Whereas Muslims, we believe that we will taste death either now or later or what have you, right? We're never going to escape death. Death is an inherent part of our life. But we also believe that this death is a temporary one, because we're going to be resurrected later on, what have you. So I do believe that scientism is something that we need to be really conscious of. You know how we talk about structural racism? It's parasitic, but it's invisible. It's not really apparent to you unless you really think about it. Scientism is like that. And unfortunately, a lot of our school systems convey that message, not necessarily in explicitly, but in the training. I can say from my own experience, it's implicitly taught in a way where unless you have the theological training, you're going to get stupefied very quickly within that scientism umbrella. So I think that's why it's very important to understand clearly, very, very clearly, that as a Muslim, what we can and cannot accept, and to be wary in how scientism has historically impacted our frame and our outlook.
Absolutely. So before we go to the question and answers, was there anything else you wanted to say about scientism's impact on theology?
No, so all I wanted to say was, I hope that you guys understand that, that scientism is a very loose word that we use all the time, and that's fine. But we also need to understand that there are impressions of scientism that have even encroached on the Muslim psychology, right? There's even a notion that's called religious scientism, where we're trying to mold our theology in a way that pays absolute lip service to science. So I forgot to mention this, right? Particularly in the West, there was a massive project called the Divine Action Project, DAP. Okay, and this was the collaborated effort of two big institutions, Center of Theology and Natural Sciences and the Vatican Observatory. Over a period of 20 years, they wanted to see if they could create a theology based on current science. So, given quantum mechanics is true, what kind of God do we believe in? Given that evolution is true, what kind of God do we believe in? So, one of the biggest advocates or one of the biggest people that was in this project is John Polkinghorne, who is very well known, right? I think many people know him, right? Now, he believes that God has an eternal pole, but he also has a temporality associated with him, such that he does not know what the future is. He has said this, right? Yeah. This is the problem. So whether you have a science-based theology, and there's a really good paper by, I forgot the name of the individual. Basically, there's a paper that I read, which is a book chapter. And in that, he argues whether our metaphysics, i.e., I'm using metaphysics and theology synonymously here, whether our metaphysics should be science dependent or independent is a big question, right? Yeah. And he gives the example of physics, right? He gives the example of physics. If you look at Newtonian paradigm, the kind of metaphysical implications is very different to the quantum mechanics paradigm, right? So now these two paradigms have very different metaphysical implications. So which one do you build your theology on? You'll always get some kind of contradiction. So it really opens the question, how far should we go to develop our theological understanding with science as the starting premise? And I am questioning whether we need to do this, right? Now, of course, there's a lot of stuff that our ulama maybe discussed, which we don't need to accept in terms of like the structure of the world, of atomism. For those who study Ash'arism, you know what I'm talking about here. But in terms of who God is, what He's capable of doing, I think that cannot necessarily be compromised. At least the way we've understood it tradition. I feel that is a very dangerous road to go on.
Absolutely. And while you're talking, just in the comments, I've put a paper that you wrote for Zygon, I believe, and it's about old masks. What's it called?
Old text, new masks.
Old text, new masks. And I think it's in this paper that you speak about imperial scientism.
No, that's another paper. In this paper I talk about how people just pretty much look into these old books by Ibn Khaldun and Rumi, and they talk about how these guys are talking about evolution. That's why it's called old text.
What's that paper called then?
That paper will be out soon, inshallah. It was rejected. That paper is called Hermeneutic Scientism, where hermeneutics is now completely morphed to whatever science says.
Yeah. So about this, and this is what's very interesting about Shoaib's approach. So things like what I've put here, I've also put in the comments, which I'm going to pin, inshallah, is what you'll find in these sort of papers is that, you know, the pro-evolutionists, the pro-Darwinists amongst the Muslims, when they try and say, not only is it the case that scientism, not only is it the case that Darwinism fits with Islam, they'll also say, actually, the early Muslims were also Darwinists, and here's why. And then they'll give all their reasoning. Now, initially, when before we spoke and you told me that you wrote this paper, I literally had no idea about how to address these people, because it was a very powerful argument, which is kind of like, well, why are you kicking up a fuss? These guys were evolutionists, right? And what you show is actually that's not the case at all, right? But additionally, I think what's powerful about your approach would be, even if they said it, that doesn't mean that's what the text says.
Yeah.
So you still be able to address it that way.
Yeah. And I think this is the where I feel like we have, some people are so pressured internally that they will try and find any kind of alignment with Islam, be it historical or theological, just to kind of get their viewpoint across. And like I said, my approach is simply, right, is that if you want to say that if Islam can accept it or not, okay, that's fine, right? Now, Islam has many camps, but within Sunni Islam, like I said, there are 3 theological schools. You prescribe to one of these 3 theological schools, and then within that, how far can you go? That is my approach, and that has always been my understanding. That you take your theology seriously, you take your tradition seriously, and then based on that, you then answer the questions, right? I particularly in a school of thought. Other people may fit in a different school of thought, but the idea here is be explicit about your makeup, about your theological makeup, and then address the question, so people can know exactly how you're doing it and where you're coming from. That's it.
Absolutely. This question for you, Shoaib, from Grey Wolf: do you think scientism's as rampant as it is today due to materialism?
So I think that materialism has played a part, because if you understand materialism in the sense that, because materialism has slightly 2 different meanings, right? Materialism is the idea that matter is all there is. That's one thing. But materialism is also used in a consumeristic sense, that you're a very materialistic person, right? So I think both of them have kind of conveyed that narrative, because, like I said, we believe that our answers are in nature, that we can use nature to be able to address that. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we make that our entire philosophy, that is problematic. Now, if you want to go now deep into this, I personally believe that capitalism is responsible for scientism, because capitalism, as soon as politicians found out how we can use science to govern people, to put people into a military institution, control people in these pigeonholes, and to be able to drive an economy forward, right? I think that became a huge driving force in really getting science out there. I think that has been one major force that we need to be wary of. So, for example, Peter Higgs, right? Peter Higgs is this big guy. He came up with the understanding of the Higgs particle, the God particle, as they say, right? And he predicted this. I think it was in the 60s. It was only recently confirmed, I think, in the past 10 years, right, with the CERN accelerator. He himself said that he only published 12 papers, and in his time he only published like 12 papers, right? But nowadays, in this cutthroat academic culture, we have to publish or perish, right? He wouldn't be able to provide quality. Now, where is that push coming from? It's coming from this capitalistic mindset: produce, 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 produce. Economy is driving this forward. And I think you even gave the example, the pharmacist, right? Where pharmacy is completely deplatformed because he gave something out for free. Now, that's a very serious concern for us. If we have big pharma mentality everywhere, how are we going to save people? So capitalism, I feel, has forced us to look into a particular way, and materialism and scientism is one of them. Perhaps.
You know, that no, it makes total sense, and it's also linked to Singapore's current government. Singapore is a capitalist paradise, as you know, and one of the things about them is that they're very anti-hereafter. If you give a talk, they don't want you to talk about the hereafter. And they recognize religion. Sometimes states use religion as a tool for power. They recognize religion impacts their productivity as a nation.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. And likewise, if you look at contemporary China, a lot of their AI and a lot of their scientific, the embrace of science isn't out of, hey, we love science, science is good. It's because it fits in their model of monitoring people. So at the moment, this morning, I was watching a really crazy video in which they've started a new thing in some nurseries in China where all the children wear this headband and it's got a certain color. I'm not sure if you've seen it. And that headband changes color when the child is concentrating or if they're not. Right?
Oh.
And they've got these computers, the teachers, it's a pilot project where they will see if the child is actually paying attention. Because like, say, for example, if I'm concentrating or if I'm distracted by dopamine triggers, right? Your brain will give you different biochemical activity, and that will be picked up by a certain color. So if it's I don't remember what the colors were, and they have a live, because the teacher can't watch all the headbands in one go. So at the end of the class, the teacher will be saying, right, here's Alex's.
Like a log, like a log. Yeah. Wow.
Crazy.
That's insane, man. Yeah, that's insane.
Crazy, absolutely. And in fact, China has a social scoring system, right? So if you get caught in your neighborhood block throwing rubbish, negative.
Negative,
good. So people.
So, bro, do you watch anime by any chance?
No.
Man, you should. It's really philosophical. I know it's cartoons, but this is pretty much Psychopaths. It's a name of an anime in action. I strongly recommend you watch it, bro. My God, it was mind-blowing when I saw this in China because it just reminded me of that show.
Wow, it's very interesting. Okay, there's another question that Muhammad Habib asked, and I highlighted it, and I stopped highlighting it, which is about your book, when your book is going to be out.
Oh, so I'm currently working on the book right now. I finished the first chapter, which was already it went beyond the word limit that I had prescribed for it. It was supposed to be a 10,000 word chapter on the science of evolution and the misconceptions. It's already now 15,000. I'm now working on chapter 2, which is going to be about the Christian theological and philosophical responses to evolution, to simplify that. And then hopefully I'm going to be doing the Muslim responses next week, inshallah. So my plan is to finish 90% of the book in this coming month, in July, and hopefully get it to the publishers by August to November, that kind of time period. They will then review it, give me some comments. I just have to go over those, and hopefully next year will be out, inshallah.
Absolutely. And we're running out of time. There's one last question which I thought was really funny. Sabur Ahmed, is Shoaib Bhai a Marxist?
No,
I don't know where he got this from.
I wouldn't know as well. Yeah, I wouldn't know as well. I'm just saying that there's a link between scientific output and capitalism. I don't know how that exactly leads to Marxism, though.
Yeah, it's kind of like that generalization. Wow, he's talking against capitalism. He must be a commie.
Yeah.
That's what's
No. I'm just saying that understand the deeper forces that structure society, right? And that's the job of the social scientist, which I believe is generally harder because these things are not always explicit. And to really understand them and see their effects, it's like trying to identify dark matter because you can't really play with it, but you know it's there. How do you prove that? I think social scientists have a hard job because they see these structural systems that are invisible but do have an impact in how people look at things. I think that's why we should pay, to that.
Absolutely. And this is Brother Hamas from Pakistan, who's in the Darwinism group, by the way.
Right. Assalamualaikum.
Yeah. He's laughing at the Marxism joke. So a lot of people have joined us today, more than usual. It's like 161 people watching. So a lot of people, they may be thinking like, where do I follow Shoaib Bhai and whatnot? So
right. So you can feel free to. I've sent Subur the YouTube channel which we use. So if you want to follow Academic Access, that's something you can follow. That's one thing. And the other thing is, if you guys want to follow us, we have a Facebook channel, and then you can also add me on Facebook as well. So these are the things. These are the channels where you can approach us and our work.
Yeah, my suggestion is follow Shoaib on Facebook, and then you'll get access to everywhere else. And he's the most. I think you're mostly active on Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah.
Irregularly and stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody was saying, I mean, it doesn't sound like an exaggeration, but you pretty much go through like 4 books a week. Something like this. So this is my question to you, like, where on earth do you get the brain juice to do that? Because I get distracted.
I seriously don't know, man. Like, on the one hand, it's a blessing from Allah. I really thank God. Like Professor Michael, he said that, because I asked him that question. How did you publish like 100 books in 80 years of your life? And he said that God has given gifts to people, and I've just used those gifts to my advantage, and I've tried to best produce it. He spoke like that. He's an agnostic, and he spoke like that, bro. Wallah al-Azim, I was shocked. And then that's all I can say is that Allah has blessed me with certain talents. He has not given me other talents, right? Yeah. But alhamdulillah, He's given me this talent, and I'm utilizing it to the best of my ability. And that's it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a believer. I'm a big believer in the growth mindset. I believe people can. Someone says they're not a leader, you can make them into a leader, X, Y, Z. But at the same time, I think people have certain skills and certain things which other people will just jump out the window and be like, I've had enough, I can't deal with that. Yeah. Which is crazy. And that's the thing, that alhamdulillah, you have that blessing, so we should use it. Okay, we're going to have you again every Sunday at the same time, inshallah. Especially during the lockdown, you won't have any excuses to run away. Because you're not, the good thing about the lockdown is when I invite people, it's like, okay, I know you're at home. But alhamdulillah, Shoaib Bhai has always been very happy to come on the channel. So that'll be great, fantastic. And it'll be good to have him. Inshallah, next week, what are we going to be discussing, Shoaib Bhai?
I don't know. I think we should have a poll and maybe get people to decide for us. We could do quite a few things. I mean, I have a few ideas in mind. But I think it might be a
lot of books, so maybe something you recently finished.
Yeah. I mean, I could. What I could do is, would you want me to give you like a list and you could do a poll on it, or would you want to decide and behind closed doors?
What I'm kind of thinking is, I think it's Kelly Clark who came on your channel.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, he did about cognitive science of religion, how the field of cognitive science of religion, whether it works for theism or atheism, that is something we can do. So we could definitely look at that.
The reason I'm thinking that is 2 things. Firstly, it's a great book. I haven't read it yet, but from the the interview, from all those things. 2, you've already interviewed him, so you can give that perspective. And 3, after we do that, more people will inshallah go and watch the interview. Because I think one of the things I said to you, I think yesterday, is I think a lot of people don't appreciate what big names are coming on the channel, and they don't. For example, everybody will know Richard Dawkins, and not that many people will know Michael Ruse, when actually within the field of evolution, no one has published more than Michael Ruse, from my understanding.
Not just that, man. He has developed the field of atheism, evolution, philosophy of biology, and evolutionary ethics. 4 fields under his name. 4 fields, man. That's like I mean, if somebody were to get a Nobel Prize in the humanities, it would have to be Professor Michael Ruse.
Yeah. Okay, so Jazakallah khair. We'll see you next week, inshallah. For everybody watching, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.